In Dad's old box, I found a letter. Your eldest son is actually your brother's child. 30 years of secrecy. But when I placed the letter on the table, during family dinner, decades of lies collapsed in seconds. It's been exactly 1 month since we buried my dad. Terry was always the steady one in our family. Reliable, straightforward, never dramatic. The kind of guy who paid his taxes early and kept every receipt organized in labeled folders. So when I volunteered to clean out his house before we put it on the market, I expected the process to be as orderly as he was. Boy, was I fucking wrong. So I started with the easy stuff. Clothes to donate, kitchen items for my sister Lila to sort through, the practical things. My mom Nora couldn't handle being in the house yet, and honestly, that was fine by me. We've never been particularly close, and grief makes everything weird anyway. The attic was my last stop. Just boxes of Christmas decorations and old tax returns, I thought. Nothing complicated. Anyway, I found this metal lockbox shoved behind a wall of dusty suitcases. It wasn't with Dad's other important documents, which, true to form, were all neatly organized in his filing cabinet. This was hidden, deliberately hidden. Long story short, the lock was ancient and basically fell apart when I tried to open it. Inside were stacks of letters, all in the same handwriting I immediately recognized as my Uncle Ronan, my dad's younger brother, the guy who taught me to fish when I was 8, who always brought me the coolest birthday presents, who I thought hung the fucking moon when I was a kid. The letter on top was dated a month before I was born, 35 years ago. I don't know what made me read it first, maybe the yellowed paper, or the way it was separate from the others. To be honest, I almost put everything back and pretended I never found it. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss, right? But I've always been the type who needs to know things, even when it hurts. Thanks for that personality trait, Dad. Or whoever the fuck you are. The first paragraph was normal enough. Brothers catching up, some inside jokes. Then halfway down the first page, everything changed. Basically, Ronan was apologizing for the affair with my mother, for getting her pregnant, for the child, me, who was about to be born. He said he'd respect whatever decision my dad made, but that he needed him to know the truth. I wasn't my father's son. I was his nephew by blood, but his son by circumstance. The room started spinning. I had to sit down on one of those plastic storage tubs. My breath felt like it was coming through a coffee stirrer. I read it again and again, each time hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They didn't. So, what does someone do after discovering their entire existence is based on a lie? Well, this someone started digging deeper. The other letters spanned years, some before my birth, many after, always in Ronan's handwriting, always addressed to my father. Some were short, others rambled for pages. The timeline became clear. My mom and uncle had an affair that started before I was conceived and apparently continued on and off for years afterward. In one letter from when I was around 5, Ronan thanked my dad for handling things so well and for being the father I could never be. He mentioned sending money, guilt money, I realized now, which explained those mysterious checks my dad would sometimes receive that he'd never discuss. To be honest, I always thought I looked more like my mom than my dad. But looking at old family photos now, with this new lens, the resemblance between me and Ronan is fucking uncanny. Same nose, same hairline, same way our eyes crinkle when we smile. How did I never see it before? How did no one ever comment on it? Anyway, I went into full investigation mode, found my birth certificate, listed Terry as my father. Obviously, old family albums, even my dad's journals. Turns out he kept his own record. Brief, factual entries about payments from Ronan. Notes about arguments with my mother that suddenly made a lot more sense. My dad knew. He always knew. And he raised me anyway. I spent the next 3 days in a fog. Didn't shower. Barely ate. Just sat in that attic surrounded by evidence of how thoroughly I'd been deceived by literally every adult I trusted growing up. The rage came in waves. First at Ronan, my biological father who watched me grow up calling another man dad. Then at my mother, who maintained this lie my entire life. Even at my dad, for never telling me the truth. Though of all of them, I understand his silence the most. He chose to be my father when he didn't have to. That counts for something. So here's where it gets interesting. Next weekend is the memorial dinner my mom planned at her house, the intimate family gathering to remember Dad. Everyone will be there. Mom, my sister Lila, Aunt Cecilia, and of course, Uncle, biological father, Ronan. For the past week, I've been planning exactly how to handle this. My first instinct was to call them all immediately and scream until my voice gave out. But that's not me. That's not how I operate. My dad, and I still consider Terry my real dad, biology be damned, taught me to think before acting. So I've been thinking. A lot. I keep imagining Ronan sitting at my father's memorial dinner, accepting condolences, maybe even sharing fond memories of his brother, all while knowing he betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible, knowing he's looking at his biological son across the table. The absolute fucking audacity of it makes my blood boil. And my mother. How will she look me in the eye? Does she see Ronan when she looks at me? Has she always? Long story short, I've decided what to do. I'm bringing the letter to dinner. The original one, dated before my birth. I'm going to place it in the center of the table after we eat. No dramatic speeches, no accusation, just the evidence, laid bare for everyone to see. I want to watch their faces when decades of carefully maintained lies collapse in seconds. My sister Leila deserves to know who her brother really is. Aunt Cecilia deserves to know what kind of man she married. And I deserve the truth. All of it, without filters or convenient omission. To be honest, I'm not sure what happens after that. Maybe we all scream and cry and never speak again. Maybe there are explanations that will make this slightly less awful, though I doubt it. Maybe I'll finally understand why my mother always seemed to hold me at arm's length, or why Ronan would sometimes look at me with this strange, sad expression when he thought I wouldn't notice. Basically, in 5 days, everything changes. Again. The only thing I know for certain is that I'm done being the only one carrying this burden. It's time for everyone else to feel the weight of it, too. So that's where I am now, sitting in my apartment with a bombshell in my briefcase, just waiting for the right moment to detonate it. I'll update after the dinner. Something tells me there will be plenty to report. Update. First, thanks to everyone who commented on my last post. Never expected that kind of response. For those asking if I actually went through with it, yeah, I did. And it was even worse than I imagined. So, the memorial dinner was yesterday. I spent the entire morning staring at that letter, second-guessing myself. Maybe this would destroy my family forever. Maybe some truths should stay buried. But every time I pictured Ronan's face, my biological father's face, my resolve hardened back up. The letter went into an envelope. The envelope went into my jacket pocket, and I drove to my mom's house with my hands shaking the entire way. Walking into that house felt surreal. The dining room was set with the good china that only comes out for holidays and funerals. Mom had put together a photo display of Dad through the years, including several pictures of him holding me as a baby. The fucking irony of it all. Anyway, Lila arrived first with the dessert she'd made. She noticed something was off immediately, asked if I was feeling okay while touching my forehead like I was 10 years old with a fever. I brushed it off, claimed it was just the emotional weight of the day. Technically, not a lie. Then came the happy couple. Ronan and Cecilia walked in, all somber smiles and gentle hugs. Ronan clasped my shoulder and told me how proud my father would be of how I was handling everything. The audacity of this man, I swear, standing there in my dad's house, comforting his son, who was actually his own biological child, about the death of the man he'd betrayed. I had to excuse myself to the bathroom before I completely lost it. Long story short, dinner itself was excruciating. Mom kept trying to start conversations about Dad's favorite fishing spots or his legendary poker night. Ronan chimed in with stories about their childhood, acting like the devoted younger brother who'd never done anything worse than steal Dad's baseball cards. Every bite of food tasted like ash. The letter in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. I noticed things I'd never picked up on before. The way my mother never quite met Ronan's eyes. How Cecilia watched them both when they were in the same space. A tightness around her mouth, suggesting she wasn't completely in the dark. The way Ronan's gaze lingered on me a beat too long when he thought I wasn't looking. To be honest, part of me hoped to find some indication that they regretted what they'd done, some hint of shame or remorse that might make this easier to understand, if not forgive. But there was nothing. Just the same family dynamic we'd always had, built on a foundation of lies. The moment came during dessert. Mom had made Dad's favorite apple pie, and everyone was getting emotional about how he'd always claimed it was better than his own mother's. The perfect moment to shatter the illusion of the devoted husband and wife, the loyal brother. So I did it. No dramatic speech, no big lead-up. I simply took out the envelope, removed the letter, and placed it in the center of the table. Then I sat back and watched. Mom saw it first. The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her eyes darted to Ronan, who hadn't noticed yet, then back to the letter, then to me. The recognition in her eyes told me everything. She knew exactly what that piece of paper was. Ronan noticed her reaction and followed her gaze to the center of the table. For a second he looked confused. Then I watched as recognition dawned. His hand actually trembled as he reached for it, eyes widening as he saw his own handwriting from 35 years ago. Basically, all hell broke loose after that. Mom started crying. Not delicate tears, but heavy, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primal. Lila kept looking between all of us, completely lost, asking what was happening. Cecilia went completely still, her face a mask I couldn't read. And Ronan, the man who fathered me and then watched another man raise me? He just kept saying my name, over and over, like he was trying to find the right words to follow it, but coming up empty. I didn't yell, didn't need to. The letters spoke for itself. I just watched them all fall apart, feeling strangely calm in the center of the storm I'd created. When Ronan finally started trying to explain, I simply stood up and walked out. Mom and Lila called after me. Ronan actually tried to follow me to my car. I just drove away. My phone exploded with notifications within minutes. Texts, calls, voicemails, first from Lila, then Mom, finally Ronan. I ignored them all, turned my phone off completely when I got home, and slept better than I had in weeks. There's something freeing about finally putting the burden of truth on the people who created the lies in the first place. This morning I turned my phone back on to 47 missed calls and over 60 text messages. Mom begging me to let her explain. Lila shocked and confused, caught in the middle of something she never knew existed. Ronan, well, his messages started with explanation, moved to apology, and eventually devolved into thinly veiled concerns about what I planned to do with this information. That's when it hit me. He's afraid. Not just of family fallout, but of something more. That's when I remembered something odd from my dad's home office. So I went back to Dad's house today, ignored the calls from my mother asking where I was going when I drove past her house, went straight to Dad's filing cabinet, to a folder labeled R Personal. Inside were years of records, canceled checks from Ronan to my father, significant amounts, far more than you'd send as birthday gifts or family support, and notes in my father's precise handwriting, documenting conversations where Ronan had apparently asked him not to tell anyone about these payments. Then I found the real smoking gun, a folder with legal documents showing that Ronan had wanted to buy property that my father owned near the lake. Dad had apparently refused to sell, despite Ronan offering well above market value. The last document was dated just 3 months before Dad got sick. Suddenly, it all made sense. The guilt money wasn't just about the affair or me. Ronan had been using his leverage, the secret of my parentage, to try to get financial advantages from my father for years. When simple payments weren't enough, he'd tried to pressure Dad into business deals. My father, the man who raised me, had been quietly enduring this emotional blackmail for my entire life. To be honest, something in me snapped at that moment. The cold anger I'd been feeling transformed into something more focused, more dangerous. Ronan hadn't just betrayed my father decades ago with a single affair. He'd been exploiting that betrayal ever since, using me, his biological son, as leverage against the man who'd actually been my true father in every way that matters. I've spent most of today making plans. Turns out I inherited more than just Ronan's nose. I got his talent for methodical thinking, too. I've pulled together all the documentation, plus started digging into Ronan's business dealing, found some interesting connections between his real estate company and some questionable transactions that would definitely raise eyebrows if the right people saw them. Long story short, Ronan's been getting sloppy with his finances, the perfect leverage point for someone who knows where to look. And thanks to my background, I know exactly where to look. Anyway, I've decided Ronan deserves to lose everything, just like he made my father lose his dignity, his business reputation, his social standing, the respect of his wife, perhaps even his freedom, if what I'm finding about his tax situations pans out. Mom keeps trying to arrange a meeting, says there are aspects of the situation I don't understand. Maybe that's true, but understanding isn't what I'm after anymore. Basically, this isn't just about exposing the truth now, it's about justice. For my dad, for me, for the family we could have been, if not for Ronan's selfishness and decades of manipulation. I've got a meeting with one of Ronan's business partners next week. Just a casual lunch between family friends where I might happen to mention some concerns I have about certain investments. This is just the beginning. I'll update again when there's more to share, but trust me, I'm just getting started. And for those wondering about Cecilia, she actually texted me late last night. Just 3 words. I always knew. Turns out I'm not the only one who's been keeping score against Ronan all these years. Might be time for a coffee with my aunt to compare notes. Update 2. It's been almost 2 months since my last update. A lot of you have messaged asking what happened. Honestly, I needed time to make sure everything played out exactly as planned before posting this final update. And let me tell you, it was worth the wait. So remember how I found those suspicious financial documents linking Ronan to some questionable business practices? Turns out that was just the tip of the iceberg. I spent weeks going through every piece of paper in my dad's office, plus doing my own research into Ronan's real estate business. Basically, I became a one-man investigation unit, fueled by rage and black coffee. What I discovered was pretty stunning. For the past 15 years, Ronan has been running a sophisticated scheme involving property valuations, tax declarations, and undisclosed conflicts of interest. Nothing overtly illegal enough to trigger automatic red flags, but definitely in that gray area that would make his investors and business partners extremely uncomfortable if they knew the detail. Anyway, I didn't want to rush this. Revenge served cold and all that. So I put together a detailed dossier on everything I found. Charts, timelines, copies of documents, organized in the same methodical way Dad taught me to approach problems. Funny how the man who wasn't my biological father gave me all the tools I needed to destroy the man who was. The first strike was surgical. I sent Ronan an unmarked envelope containing just one particularly damning document, showing how he'd manipulated a property valuation to secure funding from an investor named Marshall. No note, no explanation, just the document with key sections highlighted. I wanted him to know someone was coming for him, but not who. Let him stew in that uncertainty. 3 days later, I accidentally ran into Marshall at the golf club where he and Ronan were both members. Long story short, our casual conversation somehow drifted to investment security and ethical business practice. I mentioned some concerning trends I'd noticed in local real estate developments without specifically naming Ronan, just planted the seed of doubt. The beauty of this approach was watching Ronan's paranoia grow in real time. Through family connections, I heard he was becoming increasingly agitated, checking his records, questioning his staff. He even called Lila, asking if she knew if I was planning something against him. She had no idea what he was talking about, of course, which only made him sound more unhinged to her. To be honest, seeing his carefully constructed image start to crack gave me a satisfaction I never expected to feel. Every sleepless night I'd had since discovering the truth felt worth it. Meanwhile, I finally met with Cecilia for coffee. That conversation changed everything. Turns out she'd suspected about the affair for decades, but never had proof. What she did have, though, was knowledge of Ronan's regular business trips that coincided with times my mother was also mysteriously unavailable. She shared details about phone calls, strange behaviors, patterns that continued well into my teenage years. The affair hadn't ended after I was born. It had continued for years, with my father's knowledge. The betrayal was even deeper than I'd initially understood. But Cecilia's most valuable contribution was access to Ronan's home office. She borrowed his laptop one evening while he was in the shower and copied key files onto a drive for me. Turns out harboring decades of suspicion makes people surprisingly willing to participate in revenge plots. What I found on those files was the smoking gun. Emails showing Ronan had used knowledge of my parentage to pressure my father into various financial arrangements over the years. Not explicit blackmail, but the implication was clear enough. One email specifically mentioned our special arrangement regarding Derek, in the same paragraph as discussing a property deal. My father had been protecting me from the truth while being slowly bled dry by his brother. The rage I felt looking at those messages is something I can't even describe. So I accelerated the plan, sent carefully selected information to 3 of Ronan's major business partners. Not everything, just enough to raise serious concerns about his ethics and judgment. Within a week, 2 partnerships were under review, and one was completely dissolved. Then I reached out to the family. Not my mother or Lila yet. They were still processing everything. But the extended family, cousins, my dad's friends, people in their social circle. I shared just enough about the affair and subsequent manipulation for the information to spread naturally. No need to force it. People love to gossip, especially about someone successful who might be falling from grace. Basically, Ronan's world started collapsing around him in slow motion. Business connections disintegrating, social invitations disappearing, family members suddenly too busy to take his calls. All while he had no concrete proof that I was behind it. Throughout all this, he kept trying to contact me. Texts, calls, even showing up at my apartment once. I didn't answer the door. The messages shifted from apologetic to desperate to angry, then back to desperate again. I saved every one without responding. The final phase came last week. I sent him a text asking to meet at my dad's house, which is still unsold and empty. Neutral territory, I said. Time to clear the air. He arrived looking like hell. Unshaven, clothes wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. The man who once commanded rooms with his confidence could barely meet my gaze as he walked in. Long story short, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. Printed emails, financial records, statements from his former partners, everything I'd accumulated. Watched his face as he realized the extent of what I'd done, how methodically I'd dismantled the life he'd spent decades building. To be honest, part of me expected to feel some hesitation or remorse in that moment. He is, biologically speaking, my father. But looking at him, this man who betrayed his brother, manipulated him for years, used me as leverage without ever claiming me, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. He tried everything. Explanations, justification, even threats about what this would do to the family. When none of that worked, he broke down completely. Offered money, offered to sign over property, begged me to stop what I'd set in motion. Said he would do anything to make amends. I told him it was already done. His business was under investigation by regulatory authorities, thanks to an anonymous tip with substantial documentation. His reputation was in tatters. His marriage was likely over, given what Cecilia now knew. And his relationship with me, the son he never acknowledged, was non-existent. Then I did something that surprised even me. I handed him a DNA test kit. Told him I wanted scientific confirmation of what everyone now knew. A record for posterity. The final nail in the coffin of his denial. He took it with shaking hands. As he was leaving, he asked if I could ever forgive him. I just walked him to the door without answering. Some questions don't deserve responses. Anyway, it's been a week since that meeting. Ronan's business partners have all severed ties. 2 investors are pursuing legal action. Cecilia has moved in with her sister, and the DNA test results came back yesterday. 99.9% match. Biology confirmed what treachery had hidden for 35 years. As for me, I'm still figuring that out. My relationship with Mom is complicated. She was both victim and co-conspirator in all this. Lila and I are getting closer, though. Shared trauma has a way of doing that. I've started sorting through Dad's things again, this time looking for the man, rather than the secrets. So, that's it. The brother who betrayed my father, the biological father who never claimed me, the man who exploited a family's pain for decades. He's lost everything. His business, his reputation, his marriage, his standing in the community. All gone. Do I regret it? Not for a second. There's a certain peace in knowing that justice doesn't always require courtrooms or judges. Sometimes it just needs patience, precision, and the willingness to be as coldly calculating as the person who wronged you. Terry raised me to be a better man than Ronan, and in the end, I just used the same methodical approach to dismantle a life that my dad used to build one. Thanks to everyone who followed this insane journey. I won't be updating again. This chapter of my life is closed. Time to figure out what comes next.